Hello, everyone. We are back. I know there's been a little bit of a hiatus. Life happens and people get busy. My cat decided to try to self-destruct, and then we had to save the cat. The cat is thankfully alive, but after that and some other stuff, Elliott's been busy. It's been a few weeks, and that was not my intention. So thank you to you people who wait patiently. We are starting a new series. In some ways, it's not brand new. I know I've done a fair amount of episodes on the channel about Tolkien, but never with Elliott, and never about the Lord of the Rings per se. It's always been sort of we've done did a thing last year looking at a couple different of a few of Tolkien's like academic lectures that he gave, but never his fiction. So I'm very, 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 very excited. Obviously, I have a background to prove it. To finally be doing something on Lord of the Rings. The way that I think this is going to happen is it's not going to be, we're not doing a read through. There's many people out there doing, for far more talented than Elliott or me, doing read throughs and commentary on Lord of the Rings. You can, those are dime a dozen. You can find those and they're all pretty good. I think I'd like to do thematic episodes on Lord of the Rings. So I have a few planned. Elliott's down for them. I'm very excited. We're going to kind of jump around a lot, right? We're kind of looking at the 3 books plus the Hobbit, plus maybe even a little bit of the Silmarillion. So we'll kind of be looking at like the broader mythos, the Arda mythos, taking in true sort of, as Elliott would say, intellectual Street Fighter fashion, jumping around and taking and looking at different sections as we want. The organizing principle, though, for at least most of these episodes will have to do with thematic things, right? So we got stuff planned looking at Saruman and technocracy. I think that's I'm pretty excited about that one. We have another one planned looking at Aragorn, Denethor, and the circulation of the elites. So that should be pretty cool. Some Pareto. But I figured that perhaps in a very poetic way, it'd be best to start at the ending. And so today we're looking at the last section really of Return of the King, the Scouring of the Shire, which is a section of the books that did not make it into the movies per se. Right, or rather Frodo in the movie, Frodo has the vision of what might happen, right, if he fails in Galadriel's mirror. Obviously, huge spoilers, by the way, for all these episodes. Obviously, right, in the movie, things go down differently, right? Like Wormtongue does kill Saruman, but it's on top of Orthanc. It's not in the Shire. So much love to the movies. The movies are awesome. I really recommend, again, having said the whole spoiler thing just now, I really recommend people read the books. I do think we were just talking about this before we were recording. I do think they're basically canon. I would group Lord of the Rings as canon for Western, for at least for English language literature. Mm-hmm. It's just, they're so incredibly good. And not just in like a fun escapism kind of way, but they have, I mean, Tolkien obviously put a lot of time and effort and thought and philosophy and theology and linguistics and everything and poetry into what he was doing. So I don't know. I'm trying. I mean, I know that there's many good authors out there who've created wonderful worlds, but for me, it's just there's something about Lord of the Rings that always brings me back. I mean, they are my favorite books. But yeah, no, I recommend everyone watching this. If you haven't read the books, please read the books. If you're not a huge fan of reading, or maybe reading something that they're pretty dense, that can be kind of hard. I am a huge fan, and I am not paid by anyone to say this, but I'm a gigantic fan of the Andy Serkis audiobooks. Elliott also has, I've also gotten Elliott to start listening to those. Andy Serkis, over the past few years, really since the pandemic, has done audiobook readings of The Hobbit, and then all 3 of the Lord of the Rings books. And I mean, it's not just that he does the Gollum voice very well, right? When Gollum's on this in the books, Gollum actually doesn't really show up in the books a ton. He does a little bit, but not as much as you think. But it's more that just Andy Serkis has this amazing just reading voice. His standard narrator voice, which is his voice, his natural voice, is great, and then is really talented at accents, obviously. It's great, different characters from different regions in the Lord of the Rings world have different sort of real world English accents, which is great. So if you're listening right as an audiobook, you can clearly tell when somebody from, you know, Gondor is talking, because they all have kind of like a Sean Bean accent. Like, so they have like a North Country British accent, and you can tell, right, like when hobbits are talking, because they have a cool West Country accent. So if you're into theater, if you're into dramatic readings, if you're into Lord of the Rings at all, you want to re-experience the books. I know this is turning into a weird commercial here, but it is the single greatest way I've ever consumed the stories. So highly recommend. Anyhow, that's a very long-winded intro. Apologies for that, but we have taken several weeks off, so, you know, catching everyone up to speed. Elliott, we're looking at the final section today, Scouring of the Shire. Do we want to just give a since so spoilers ahead? I think, you know, since a lot of people probably you know, a lot of people have read the books, not everyone has. The ending, the books end slightly differently than the movies, not drastically so, but there's essentially a whole final adventure at the end of The Return of the King that's not present in the book. So do we want, Elliott, I don't know how we want to do this. We want
I guess I'll give an analogy,
or just jump in.
This.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, right, I'll give an analogy for the allergic to spoiler people, right? Because I think that we in our society actually have a very pathological relationship with spoilers. Now, I am extremely spoiler tolerant. I mean, unless it's a movie with a twist, right, and you spoil the twist, right?
Yeah,
I literally don't
twist.
Care.
This isn't a twist. It's just, yeah,
this is coming, right? So what I'll say is that, like, I think that a lot of people, when it comes to spoilers, it's like, well, I don't want to know anything about the cake because I want to be surprised by the flavor of the cake, right? And so this spoiler will tell you in great detail what the flavor of the cake. But the reason why you read The Lord of the Rings isn't because you haven't had a chocolate cake. In fact, every single chocolate cake is based off of this chocolate cake. This is the first chocolate cake. But it just turns out that it is the best chocolate cake you will ever eat. So you don't consume Lord of the Rings because it is novel, because it's not. It's been played to death by now. Every fantasy is Lord of the Rings, but you eat it because it is the richest, most decadent, most nutritious thing you have ever read in your entire life, right? So don't worry about spoilers. Fuck the spoilers. No, I just read it for the poems, you know.
Read it for the and so let this we're, you know, it's weird, but we're the weird right. We kind of do what we want. We're in a time war, baby. We're starting at the end. So use this. If you've never read them before, use this little this discussion of the end as sort of use it, let it entice you to read it from the beginning, I guess is what I'm, because that's what I hope this does. Also, that's sort of like the broad, you know, ode to Tolkien, literature, hurrah, create, world creation, all these great things. On a more perhaps mundane, in the literal sense of like what's happening in the world level, Elliott, I'm certain you'll agree. When you look at the events of the Scouring of the Shire through the lens of the past 3 years, kind of hits you in the soft spot, but maybe not in a great way. Oof, that's kind of, there were some moments too upon rereading or re-listening, since I was doing it in audiobook form, to the chapter, that was like, oof. It's just like you really feel for like Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin and all the hobbits, right? You really feel for the hobbits. Man, it's not because, at least for me, it's not because I grew up in a Shire like existence. I mean, I didn't grow up where there are bears, Elliott. I grew up in the city. But I mean, I grew up in a city that's within close proximity to nature, and I really like nature, and I really like the things that the Shire world has. I want hobbits to be real. I try to be a hobbit in real life, even though, as we've been talking about, I'm probably more of a dwarf. I try to be a hobbit. I like hobbits. I'm married to a hobbit, total hobbit wife. I like hobbits. You go into the world and you're listening to it again, and just the destruction is just painful. But the things that happen to the Shire at the end of Lord of the Rings are very similar to things that have been going on recently. And we've talked about this before, not with Elliott, but on the show, of when you look at Tolkien, right? Tolkien was very allergic to allegory and was more interested in myth. And that's very true. But a good myth, which I would argue Lord of the Rings is, has resonances throughout your life. And it doesn't, you don't need to say, oh, the Scouring of the Shire is just like when X, but you can say, and I think it's quite right to say, oh, that reminds me a lot of, or that feels a lot like what happened to me during the pandemic. This feels a lot like what was normalized during the pandemic. This feels a scary amount, a lot like the things, the things that the hobbits lose. Oh, I feel like this gives sort of voice to some things that I've lost. And not
same
just
thing after 9/11, by the way.
9/11, yeah. So, and I think we'll jump into the specifics soon, I promise. But I think that's the power of story, and I think that's the power of myth right there. And I think that's the sign of a good story, right? And a good myth is one that, it's not like you read the book and go, wow, that is literally me. You're not like some soy boy, that's literally me. No, you're just like, oh, that really hits me in a place that is quite vulnerable, right? And I think in a world that is progressively more and more jaded and just doesn't give a shit, to be hit in vulnerable places in a way that produces introspection, I think is a good thing. So kids, for nothing else, read Lord of the Rings for that. Elliott, so it had been a long time. I'll try to shut up here. I know it's hard for me to do that. It's been a while, it sounds like, since you read, or in this case, listened to Lord of the Rings. Upon coming back to, again, reading this last little bit again, particularly in light of the past 3 years, I'm interested in like how it hit you, because that's obviously how it hit me, but how did it, I'm just interested in what you felt as you were reading it. Let's talk about
so no, 100%. So the last time I read it before this time was probably 2018. Okay. And around 2018, I was getting really nervous about technocracy anyway, right? And then obviously the pandemic happens, or the lockdowns, as I prefer to remember them as. Lockdown. Because the pandemic is almost entirely incidental in my mind. But regardless, so I remember it thusly, right? Essentially, in my head before I reread it this time, which is that, okay, Saruman. So a lot of times when you do the hero's journey, right, you come back and the hero, the hero is celebrated for doing their thing, and then they rest, right? This is different, and this is where Tolkien, you can really see him driving home the point of, this is why it's not just important to go on the hero's journey for you, but it's also important to go on the hero's journey for everyone else, and it's important that you conquer power, right? And power over you in particular, right? And that you gain the skills required to conquer power over you and over others in particular, right? So all of these things, all of these like lessons that Tolkien has for us, right? They are solidified, they are made clear through the Scouring of the Shire. So basically what happens is Saruman in the books gets away at Isengard, right? And so he flees, and you don't really hear from him very often for the rest of the book. And you're like, okay, maybe he never pops up again. So Frodo's on his way home. He drops everybody from the Fellowship off. We wrap up everybody's stories in very satisfying ways. And he and Sam and Merry and Pippin are headed back home. And they go and they see the Shire, some of the surrounding villages of the Shire, and there is fences, right? And they're like, oh, hey, how's it going, dude of the watch, right, at this fence? And he's like, oh, I can't let you in. And they're like, what the heck are you talking about? Come on, man, right? And they eventually, demand that he opens the fence. And it turns out that a fascist dystopia has descended upon the Shire, right? And I remember this as Saruman taking a bunch of orcs and essentially World War IIing the Shire. But it's much worse than that, actually. What Saruman does is he sets up a puppet ruler
Yep.
right? A South American dictator
Lotho.
over the Shire.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, Lawful.
he traps a hobbit, sort of again.
Yep.
Yeah, he tricks a hobbit, and again, Saruman has lost most of his power at this point, but he still has the power of his voice. And if we know anything from the books, right, Saruman's voice has innate power to it. He can delude you, he can convince you that things are right that are wrong. Right, Saruman's voice is a big thing. So yeah, he uses his voice to sort of, while our heroes are away, trick Lotho into becoming sort of this chief hobbit, which is whatever that is, right? That's a new and, let's say, foreign category to the hobbits. They're like, what? They're like, the chief? What do you mean?
And he centralizes all the bread and all the beer, right? And this is a really interesting thing. He is the first king of the hobbit. Yeah, and all
no
the
more
tobacco,
pipeweed,
right?
no more beer. He doesn't hold with beer, right? Is what they say. Yeah. And food, and it's not just the pleasantries of life, it's food. It's like the grain is, well, they don't say it's stolen, it's gathered.
Yes.
It's gathered for the good of the Shire, which means, of course, for the good of the, you got Saruman's cronies, who are like, half orcs and like ne'er-do-well ruffians, they call them, right? And then you got maybe a few actually bad hobbits who've completely gone over. But the vast majority of the hobbits are kind of like, well, shit, if we don't follow them, they're going to like hurt or kill us. So
and this is really important, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the guys, and this was the part that I had forgotten, but that was deeply enriching rereading it, right? Which was that I thought it was just Saruman imposing his will and literally scouring the Shire. So he was ripping up trees. He was, producing industrial, basically establishing a military industrial complex, a mini version of that, on the Shire, right? And I remembered that part, which was like, okay, he's talking vaguely, about the dangers of industrialization and centralization in kings and all that stuff. But what I've forgotten about was that he was also talking about essentially weak men allow for hard times, because the hobbits didn't descend into madness on their own. They were tricked by an evil capitalist, essentially.
Well, but, an evil industrialist. How about that? Because if the hobbits are kind of have an anarcho-capitalist quality to them, right? They're all kind of about the free exchange. Hobbits are freely exchanging favors and gifts and things all the time, and then receiving things all the time. So it's not like there's no commerce happening in the Shire, right? In the strength of the Shire, I would argue, is that they are so free in their exchanging. Back and forth reciprocally, like they're not, there's a give and a take, an economy, if you will. But yeah, this is this incredibly
and that's where he gets the technocratic aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so what's interesting is all the hobbits are like, oh well, I mean, what can any one of us do? Right. And Merry, Pippin, and Frodo and Sam, they're all irate, right?
Right.
And now being possibly some of the best warriors, individual warriors in the land,
or at
right?
Least,
like legitimately speaking.
At least Merry and Pippin, right? At least Merry and Pippin. Yeah.
100%. And Frodo and Sam being brave, tough as nails, like they're not afraid of anything anymore. Oh, death. Oh, terrible prospect at this point, right?
Right.
So the four of them go and they just straight up, they put their foot down. They say, no, I will kill you.
They go full.
You've taken over the Shire.
The hobbits go full VC. Like they're like, we will wage a hobbit guerrilla war on you. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fucking amazing.
And so what they do is they say they're basically, there is some Saruman's or some of the dude, I forget his name, Lothos guys. Lothos guys. His guys come to arrest him, and
it's not Lotho, right? Because again, spoilers. We learned that Lotho's been dead for a while, and people didn't know that he was murdered. So
but it was his men. It wasn't Saruman's men.
Well, it's Sharky's men, right? Yeah, so they keep talking about Sharky, and it turns out, right, spoiler, that Sharky is one of Saruman's names, right? And so he's sort of going by Sharky, and that's he's lost his former grandeur as Saruman the White. He becomes Saruman the Multicolored, which you can read into that however you want to.
Fucking
We're going to talk about that in a future episode. Yeah, future episode. And so now he's just Sharky, and he is this small, disheveled, like just evil wretch of what he especially compared to what he used to be, but he still has enough evil left in him to, you know, sort of take on the mantle, pun intended, of Sharky, and kind of, and so he can still, you know, carry out evil, and you know, he's no longer destabilizing, you know, he's no longer threatening to plunge all of Middle Earth into darkness by helping Sauron, but he is still capable enough of completely, at least initially, at least on the surface, fucking up whole sections of the Shire. We're not just talking about being horrible to hobbits, right? Like horrible to the land itself, chopping down trees, turning you know, mills that were once designed just for kind of like, you know, grinding grain down into, you know, flour. Oh, okay, well now they're like industrial like workhouses that are kind of like, you're going to pump out, you're going to produce. What are we producing? Doesn't matter. Sharky says you need to produce, or you're going to get the boot, or you're going to get put in the lockholds, which are these like underground storage areas. Well, they're turned into prisons. So you got secret police going around, throwing people in the prisons, and you got hobbits turning on themselves because they're either scared or there's money in turning in your fellow hobbits. So there's a huge amount of distrust between the hobbits, right? And so this is a whole classic divide and conquer scenario, right? You get people to not trust each other. You break down, here we go for some weird right stuff. You break down traditional hierarchical structures and you insert your own flattened structures. And this is the situation that the hobbits are faced with when they enter the Shire.
And our heroes are able to, like, the thing is that it's a single chapter, right? Like, it really is a complete non-issue. You know, it's an emotional problem.
Yeah.
But if you were reading this physical book, you'd be like, oh my God, how is this book going to end? Like, we just literally for the last several chapters, we've been dropping everybody off around Middle Earth, saying goodbye. Yeah. People have been like leaving to the West and stuff like that. And you're like, what a horrible way to end the book, dude. But it's like, no, when you realize that these four dudes, having gone on their hero's journey, having conquered power itself, right, by evil power incarnate itself, are able to just say, no, dude, I will kill you, right? Like, you were acting badly, and if you continue to act badly around me, I will just stab you, right? And they're very confident in this.
I love it too, right? Because, okay, none of these quotes are going to be verbatim. I'm bad at verbatim. And again, I listened to it, so I wasn't taking notes. I was just letting it wash over me with Andy Serkis's beautiful voice. So I still recommend this is the best way to read it. But you know, it's great because Tolkien actually gives you these wonderful insights into the psychology of the ruffians, as they're called, right? Of the gatherers and the ruffians. And they are on the surface, I mean, they are nasty, but they're very much weak men, because the instant our heroes pull out like Rohan steel and Gondor blades and say, you know, I am a friend of the king I am a friend of the true king. And how dare you talk to my friend this way? I will kill you. I mean, they say, well, I think that I will set steel to you, which is a Tolkien way of saying, I want to murk you. I'm going to kill you if you keep doing this. Like they just don't know. Some of the ruffians just straight up don't know what to do. They're like perplexed, but most of them are like, oh, fuck. And then like run. And, you know, hobbits being hobbits, they're like, okay, if you're going to run away and leave, that's fine. Well, it's not fine, but like, get out of here, right? Like, we'll let you go. But some of them Elliot, some of the ruffians fuck around, and guess what? They find out and in a big way. And this is the thing too. It's interesting because it's not just that you have these, dare we say, natural elite hobbits returned from a big adventure who have a lot of fancy shit and a lot of fancy skills and a huge amount of confidence. Because again, as you quite rightly said, Elliot,
and well-placed confidence.
Fucking ruffians. We went up against like the armies of Mordor. Like, what are you in comparison, right? But it's that, so you got these elites that were sort of the galvanizing force that you needed to bring people together. Because obviously, not all the hobbits for the past however many years, 2 years or whatever it is, or a year, are super happy about what's been going on, but they're like, well, shit, I don't want to get killed by being the only one to say something, the only one to do something, right? That rebellion would get put down really quickly. these you get these elite hobbits come in, and they're able to awaken and unify the sort of the anger that was been bubbling under the surface. But what you also recognize, and this is upon re-listening to the chapter today before the episode, it's not just that like, oh, we finally have hero leader hobbits, now we will fight. It's like, no, hobbits actually can fight. It's just that they don't like fighting, because hobbits are, generally speaking, agreeable, well, creatures. They're agreeable beings, but they are actually able to do some damage, some real damage, if you piss them off and if you can organize them enough. And so all they really needed was just a few organizing figures, right? You got your military expertise, right, with Merry and Pippin. They know how to kill people, right? They've done it. They've killed orcs.
They've literally been knighted.
Yeah, they've
right?
been knighted,
or squired.
Yeah, they've been they know their shit. And then you have Sam, who is really the heart. I think Sam is the heart of the story, right? Like Sam is like the heart, the feeling, like all of the good primal drives, not the negative primal drives, but like the good primal drives of hobbitdom, of hobbits are epitomized in him. So you get like Sam's the one who worries about like Farmer Cotton and Rosie, right? Like he wants, like, I want to check on them. Like the rest of the guys are like, Merry and Pippin are like, we need to like retake the Shire, and Sam's like, yes, but I want to make sure that the people I care about are not dead, right? So and Sam takes some risks to go check on them, right? And it's like, they're like, well, don't do that. And he's like, well, I'm going to do this, because why are we fighting if it's not for like, right, the people, or the fellow hobbits, right, and the land. Sam cares, is the most deeply wounded by what happens to Sam's the gardener, right? He's the most deeply wounded by what happens to the Shire. And then you also have Frodo, who in many respects is kind of super emo at this point. I mean, he's had a shit lot. Like Frodo's not had a good time, right? But Frodo's also the one who's there, is kind of the conscience, right, of the four hobbits, because he's the one who tries to pull their rage back, just the hobbits' rage back just a bit. Like, let's not kill every single ruffian. We might have to kill some, and that's horrible. We got to do it, but let's
avoid killing any of the ruffians, because they were ready to go.
Right, because Frodo's the one who's like, let's not kill prisoners, right? Let's not do that. Like, let's not become the people that we're trying to stop here, right? Because they would totally kill prisoners. But because they so sort of, again, jumping around a bit, but there's a huge fucking battle in the Shire. You don't think of battles happening in the Shire, right? You think of the Shire as being insulated from all of the shit outside, but it comes home, right? And there's that bit too where it's like where Sam says it comes home to you, right? Like the effects of Mordor, right? Like Mordor has arrived in the Shire. And so there's and when evil gets to that point, right, there's not exactly a totally peaceful way to fix the problem, right? Because it's too entrenched. And you have to break it. You have to break through it. So there's a whole battle. And hobbits are killing ruffians. Like they're shooting bows from the trees. Again, like I said, they go full VC. It's like VC, like crazy guerrilla warfare. Hobbits from the trees, walking around like little hobbits killing full-size men. Hobbits are tough. Just because they're small doesn't mean they're not dangerous, right? It's just they tend to be agreeable people, so they don't tend to want to go around and just kill people, right? But if you fuck with the Shire, like I said, you end up finding out, and there's some finding out that happens. So, yeah.
I also think, I mean, one thing to give the Shire like a little bit of credit, because it's easy to say, oh my God, like these Shire people, right? They totally fell for it, right? But here's the thing: is that they were pretty gradually. I'm almost certain that this was and I really hate the metaphor, by the way, because just so everybody knows, when everybody uses the term "boil the frog," it's not what you think it means, right? The original experiment that the person did back in the 18 or 1700s to boil the frog, and then it didn't jump out. Dude, he removed the brain first. If you are a frog and you are being boiled, that means you are brainless, which frankly, given most Americans, is probably the case. So fair enough. But the only way to boil a frog is by removing its brain first. Like that was the first experiment, is to point out that the thing that controls the body is the brain. And you can't boil a frog without its brain. Right. So, and these hobbits in some ways were lacking proper awareness, right? They were not probably properly sensitive enough to evil, right? Like they probably just did like, oh, okay, maybe this is fair enough. Like this one reform, no big deal, because Saruman was
it's shiny,
subtle enough.
It's modern.
Right?
Hey, it's modern.
Yeah.
It's better.
Oh, well, maybe it could be better that way. I don't know.
Maybe it is better. Yeah. Right? I mean,
I could see
agreeable, nice
totally
people.
Reasonable.
Agreeable, nice people are a good thing. We like them, but at the risk of sounding like Dr. Peterson here, for every trait there is a weakness and a strength, right? And so if you're very agreeable, that's actually really good, because otherwise, you just have like the world, like nothing would ever get done. People would just be at each other's throats. But you can't be so agreeable, or if you are super agreeable, you have to be at least self-aware enough to go, wait a second, maybe I need to run this by a disagreeable person to see what they say, because is this better, right?
This is what we see at the beginning of the book with the hobbits starting out with fear and contempt for the Striders, right?
For the Dunedain. Yeah.
Yep.
And then you learn fairly quickly in Fellowship, again, we're jumping around, like as I said we would, that the only reason that the Shire has been so unmolested for so long is because men of the West go and kill bad things. Like the Rangers murk shit. They kill things that are evil. That's why they're unmolested. And they do this selflessly. That's why. So yeah, it is really like there are strong men out there killing bad men. And that's why the Shire is so great. And that doesn't mean the Shire is not great, but it means that the Shire exists in this way. I don't want to say artificially, but it doesn't just happen this way, right? That there are defense. You're like, oh, the Shire, when you first start reading, oh, the Shire doesn't have any defenses. I guess they don't need it. Well, there are people defending the Shire the whole time. Hobbits don't know, and they kind of don't need to know. They're on a need to know basis for a long time, right? And they just kind of don't need to know. And maybe that's a mistake, right, on Gandalf and the Rangers' part. You could somebody probably has some theories about that, right? I don't know. I mean, but that's also kind of what makes the Hobbits great, is that they're not an incredibly martial society, right? They have their sheriffs, as they call them, but right, and as they get into as Tolkien gets into in the chapter, the sheriffs hitherto were kind of just for like, oh, stop the bar fight, and like let's like check on like the fences need repairing, and there's a sheriff here to refer, and maybe somebody has a dispute.
There's coyotes about, let me escort you to your home, right?
Yeah, there's some mild, there's some obviously there's little fights that happen between Hobbit families, but nothing like involving murder or anything. Maybe somebody steals somebody's chicken or something, and it's like this big thing, okay, get the sheriffs and figure it out, have to make peace. But it's nothing like what the sheriffs become under the rule of Sharky, aka Saruman, which is they become like the collaborators, right? There's Hobbit collaborators.
And they're just as fearful as everybody else, right? Because even though they have and this is where I double down on the whole, like they the little unit of hobbits, little fire team of hobbits that went out and braved the world. Right.
Hell yeah.
There's 4 of them, right? And they have, it's pretty funny because they have 2 just run and gun dudes, a support dude, and then a leader guy, right? Like it's literally a fire team. But anyway,
fire team Shire, yeah. But no, fire team Tater, yeah, fire team Taters, yeah.
Got little potatoes.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, they went out, they contended the world, and they came to terms with power and its consequences, and force and its consequences, right? And they overcame quite a bit of stuff. And these sheriffs were fully capable of doing everything that the hobbits were doing, probably just as well, right? Like the hobbits were probably more polished fighters, but at the end of the day, the sheriffs could have led this revolution. They had the respect, but they did not have the experience contending with evil and overcoming evil like everybody else had. They did not, had they had the sheriffs come up, into if had they come up against like Saruman personally, they probably would have cowered, right? But the hobbits know, they understand his power level, and this is really important actually, right? Because the Shire, we've been pointing out, it tends to have a low kind of low amplitude range, right? Like it doesn't really understand anything beyond sort of the stakes are small, right? They don't understand how big the stakes could be, right? And a lot of the kingdoms of men don't really understand how big the stakes could be either. The elves understand the stakes, but they're a little bit different, and the dwarves understand the stakes, but they're also different, right? They're detached in a different way, right? And that's why I think actually maybe you might be a dwarf, because I think elves are detached into abstraction and dwarves are detached into particulars, right? But anyway, that's the point.
Hey, dwarves are autists. That's what you're saying? I don't know, something like that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, 100%. Like, elves are artists, and exactly. We have our
artists, dwarves are autists. Okay.
But this is the beauty, is because dwarves are also not really corruptible in the same way that men are corruptible, because they're too autistic to be corrupted.
Dwarves are they're corruptible, but they're corruptible in this very narrow kind of like Thorin and the Arkenstone kind of corruptible Hobbit reference. They can be corrupted by greed, but it's greed, like you said, greed for the particular, not for the dominion of all life. Right.
And it's not so much greed for the, I mean, obviously, yes, we do have examples of dwarves who are greedy kind of for their own whatever, but I don't get the sense that it is a pure ego trip, right? It's one of those things that you have to be careful with some of these forces, because then they end up being a mind of their own after a while, and they'll possess you back, type of thing. But regardless, so the sheriffs could have led this revolution from within, no problem, and they could have put their foot down forever ago, but they were fearful and they didn't understand the scope of power. And even if they weren't fearful, they probably, and they had come up against like Saruman, they wouldn't have been able to deal with him, because they wouldn't have understood that he bleeds just like everybody else, right?
And this brings us to the kind of the end of the chapter, where we actually meet Saruman, who's has his little lackey Grima Wormtongue, who's been reduced to like literal dog status, walking around on all fours and shit. And right, so there's this whole kind of like
simp.
Total simp. He's also kind of a gimp in some ways too.
Hey,
go
bunch of soy boys.
A bunch of fucking soy boys. So there's this whole thing, right, where like, well, the hobbits are like pissed off at this point, right? They've had, they're like, let's kill Saruman. And Frodo is still kind of like, he was great once, like he no longer poses a threat to us. The damage has already been done. Like you're killing him is not going to bring back the dead hobbits, right? It's not going to regrow the trees. It's not going to do it's in some ways I think Frodo's a much better, despite being so damaged. I would be on the Samwise side of like, let's just, or maybe more Merry or Pippin, let's just murk him, like let's just kill him, like. But again, Frodo is sort of the conscience, as we've said, of the Shire in many ways. It's like, no, like let him go. And then obviously or there's this bit where Saruman's like, and if were any of you to kill me, my death would curse this land, and they all back away. And then Frodo's like, he's lying. Like he the last bit of his power is in his ability to make you believe that would ever happen. And so lets him go. Saruman tries to kill Frodo, but Frodo's got this Mithril. Remember Mithril? Remember that thing? I remember Mithril. Remember Mithril? And so Mithril coat, is again saves the day, and then they're really going to kill him. And Frodo's like, nope, not even now. Let him go. And so then he's like, we learn, Saruman calls to Grima Wormtongue, who comes out, and he basically tells everyone, oh, by the way, Lotho's been dead for a while. Grima killed him in his sleep. And Wormtongue's like, well, you made me do that. And then Saruman's like, haha, brushes past him. And then Grima goes nuts and stabs and kills Saruman, or rather cuts his throat from behind. So it is interesting how in the movies, right, like this scene does happen in a way, right, but it happens on top of Orthanc Tower, and it's not, at least in the extended edition, it's not in the Shire, right, because the Scouring of the Shire doesn't really happen in the movies, but it's the same dynamic, right, of like Saruman pushed Grima just 1 inch too far, like, and it just gets, and it's his undoing. And you have this, like, again, the way the Tolkien describes it, it's very visual. Tolkien is a very visual. I always like when you read Tolkien, you're picturing landscapes, and it's very incredibly visual storytelling for being literature. And there's this like intense, like, I in my mind, I imagine it almost a bit like end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right? He chose poorly, he drank from the wrong cup. This like unraveling as Saruman dies, his essence is like leaving, right? And he's turning into nothing. He's hollow. And you know that, and this is a thing we'll return to, because we're going to do a whole episode on Saruman, and also on, you know, we'll be talking a lot about evil in the world of Lord of the Rings, right? But there's a sense of hollowness to all of it, right? That evil is it's this actual threat, it's a real thing, but it's when you can get like when you can puncture it or pierce it, it becomes this void, right? It's really kind of, it's a nothing that poses a serious threat and does do damage, but it's also kind of nothing, right?
Oh, you know what? That's really interesting. I hadn't considered, this is the wonderful analysis, because the ring literally is a ring. It is empty, right? The ring only truly activates when the substance is put into it, right? Like through a finger, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But
no,
and of course, like Saruman also crumbles, right? Or
so that's what I'm saying. He crumbles.
Yeah.
And then the hobbits, I guess, because they're just like, they got itchy trigger fingers, they end up killing Grima, even though Grima kind of killed the big bad and was trying to run away. They still kill him. You got to, again, those hobbit are not part of the fire team potatoes. Those are the untrained hobbits who are like, we got hunting bows, let's shoot something. And okay, they got to drill a little bit on that, right? The ROE needs a little work when you actually engage, but anyhow, thus ends the chapter, really, and thus ends both Saruman and Grima. So yeah, you know, like I said, it's not unsimilar to how Saruman ends in the movies, but you lose all of this nuance, right? Because it's not in the Shire. It's not all this stuff hasn't happened at that point. But yeah, I mean, Saruman is bad, but he's also kind of hollow. But the sad thing too is that he didn't start out hollow, right? As you know, and this is how you can tell that Tolkien's very Christian, specifically Catholic. Evil doesn't start out as evil. It's twisted around and hollowed out. It's bent and hollowed like a ring, right? And you know, ring, wrath, writhe, and wraith, ring, wraith, those are all related terms, right? For bending. It's a bending thing.
Interesting.
Something that's bending. To writhe, to wrath, it's turned somehow, right? I mean, you could, it doesn't necessarily need to be perverted, but in this sense, like, evil is perverted good, right? Like it's almost like good that doesn't want the good, it's good that wants its own ends as opposed to the good, and so it falls away from good. And so Saruman has this chance, I guess, right? Frodo gives Saruman a chance to find some sort of redemption, which is incredibly generous, right? Considering all the shit that Saruman did. But this is also very, very much, this keeps happening in Tolkien's mythos, right? Because it's almost like he's trying to get a message across to us that evil bends back upon itself because it is so bent. And even with, you know, Frodo's very generous offer of some chance, at least, of redemption, it is in Saruman's continued mistreatment of his lackey that he finally meets his end, right? He gets,
and that was my favorite part, of this last little bit too, is that, like, you know, Tolkien very clearly points out, hey, we didn't do this. He did not meet his end because of the hobbits having itchy trigger fingers, right? Out of the aggro of the hobbits, right? Out of the malice of the hobbits. He didn't meet his end out of the fear of the hobbits either, right? Because Frodo is like, no, we will still let him go because he actually does have no power over us. We don't need to fear him. So we shouldn't kill him out of anger. We shouldn't kill him out of fear. We should let him go. And then he can't help himself because Wormtongue probably would have been a loyal servant, but, you know, he just really can't help but twist the knife in Wormtongue, where Wormtongue is probably...
Wormtongue in the face. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, he kicks him in the face right after Wormtongue is like, dude, like, how dare you, like, of course Wormtongue is too cowardly to take responsibility for the fact that he killed the Hobbit, but he's like, how dare you blame me, right, for doing your bidding? Like, in a certain way, you could say he's cowardly. He's also very loyal, though, to the side he signed up to, which is in some ways admirable. But he signed up to evil, and evil does not. Evil has contempt for subservience, right?
Yeah.
Power has contempt for those who are underneath them,
at least
right?
twisted
And
power.
twisted power, right? Correct. Yeah. Well, and power in the sense of the Ring of Power, right?
Yeah, the Ring of
in
Power,
this specific. I don't know.
We'll get into that when we talk about Aragorn, because Aragorn uses power in a very different way, but he still uses power. Yeah,
of course. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Not to be libertarian about it.
Yeah,
but,
I was going to say the libertarians will say Lord of the Rings is a story about destroying power. I'm like, no, it's a story about destroying evil. Get it right. Like, read the fucking book. Mm-hmm. Good Lord. Yeah, it's a story about destroying evil with power. As there were some nap violations, okay? Like, what are you gonna do? Like some orcs were killed, okay? They are orcs. Anyhow.
And it wasn't okay to kill the orcs because they weren't human. Looking at you, right wingers. Like, come on, everybody can be.
Exactly. Yeah, there were some bad men as well, right? Yeah. So anyhow, no, it's but again, as myth is oftentimes cyclical in some ways, right? And and as somebody who loves to keep rereading Lord of the Rings, you read it I try to read it every year. It's a tradition I've started, and it's nice. But it's kind of nice to start at the end, not just because this is a section that wasn't filmed in the movies, but also because it primes us for the discussion. Right at the end of the story here, we have so many of Tolkien's themes crystallized into very nice final forms, and those forms will be nice to use as we jump through, right? Jumping around through the entire book, through the trilogy, because the idea of like bending back on itself, the evil bending back on itself, the hollowness of evil, how it is bad, but once it's defeated, it feels like it was nothing, right?
Well, and I want to kind of point out, like, because we've been given circles or rings, I guess, a bad rap, but I want to give circularity a little bit of a good rap in the form of chiasmus, right? Because it struck me, like, right before we got on the call, that there's actually this beautiful symmetry between, and I'd be very interested to know if there is actually a literary chiasmus that one could find between, the center point of the book and everything else, right? But I essentially, like, there is the very beginning of the book, we see Gandalf entering the Shire as a welcome guest, right? And entering Bag End as a welcome guest with the Ring of Power. And without the Ring of Power, we see Saruman exiting Bag End and dying in the Shire as an unwelcomed conqueror, right? So it's this beautiful symmetry between the two characters, actually.
Yeah, and I hadn't quite thought about it quite in that way. This is just, again, this is why I do, obviously I'm very, very biased, but it's okay to be biased. I think it's not just that the Lord of the Rings are my favorite novels to read for me, although that is clearly the case. It's that I think they have a lot to say about, it's a myth about a lot of things, like any good myth, but it has a lot to say about living in the modern world, right? Because Tolkien's whole life was a modern life, right? Tolkien lived in the past in his mind, but lived very much in modern times in his body. Particularly in the first part of his life. And so I think, obviously we're, the 21st century is in many ways very different than the 20th, but there's still a lot of, it's a progression. You know what I mean? It's a progression of what had started in Tolkien's lifetime. And Tolkien is I don't know if I call him a reactionary, but he's definitely reacting against stuff, right? It's definitely informing the themes, right? If not the actual events of the story, it's informing the themes of the story. I think that, like, you want a story to be all the good, you want it to be entertaining and exciting and compelling, but you also want it to actually have something to say, right? You want it to be one of those stories that actually means something. I'm referencing Sam's earlier speech to Frodo here, right? You want it to be a story that actually people want to tell again, right? So upon the retelling, upon this going back to bring it back to your cyclical chiasmus thing there, the retelling is the important part, right? The stories that you retell actually matter.
The reproduction of the story as opposed to just the production of the story.
Exactly. And every time you listen to it and then get together like we're doing here and discuss it, you notice new things about it, right? If it's a good story, you'll always notice something new about it. Something will jump out at you, right? Because it's a masterwork, but also because, you know, like my life this year is different than it was last year. So when I'm doing the read through this year, I'm picking up on different things. And but you know, the themes of the Scouring really still, unfortunately, I don't say it like with any joy, unfortunately, have become very much like in your face, particularly if you live in the state of Washington. There's been stuff happening this week where you feel more and more like, oh, the gatherers are here. The sheriffs are here. The sheriffs are making rules about what you can and can't have. I'll let everyone fill in the blanks about that. There's new rules come down from on high about what you can and can't have. Am I breaking the law? Nobody knows yet. Maybe, maybe not. Feels really similar. So
no, absolutely.
I'm restraining the rant about that. Sorry, but that's yeah.
No, I think it's just so interesting, this bit where it strikes me that a really quality myth is a story where everybody can see themselves in many different parts. Maybe not every part, but every different part. And like you say, it's the sort of story that is applicable to you no matter how your life goes. And it allows you to live a rich life and still be a guide to you, versus if you see a lot of the media mass consumption media nowadays, everybody has their sort of narrow thing that kind of clicks with them where they are right now, right? And they either constrain themselves to that so they can stay in that little mini tribe, right? And continue to get the meaning, but a narrower, like hemmed in meaning, or they end up diffuse across many different disjointed, you know, it's a sort of weird Marvel multiverse where things become a lowest common denominator and ends up being a beige nonsense thing, as opposed to this vibrant tapestry that people like, not just Tolkien, I mean, also Dune, right?
Oh, Dune, Herbert.
Herbert, what's his name?
Frank Herbert?
Frank Herbert, sorry, like a Herbert, right?
Tacoma native, represent.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So just to you know clarify, it's not just like I'm a Tolkien fanboy, but it's like, hey, there have been a few mythological scale stories that have come out.
Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe is another one that comes to mind. Yeah, Gene Wolfe.
Fair enough.
This deep world. But you know, so it's not uniquely Tolkien. He's not the only one doing this, but I think he does it the best. And I think he, you know, there are other writers, particularly fantasy sci-fi writers, that do certain things better than him. Totally true. But nobody does it nobody wraps it up together like he does, right? In this chiasmic kind of way. It doesn't do that. At least not to my satisfaction. And that's what always brings me back to Lord of the Rings, is that there is this, you know, you'll finish the books, you finish the adventure, and you know, maybe you go read some other stuff, do some other stuff, but then it's like, hey, well, why not do a reread of like the Silmarillion? I love the Silmarillion, right? You just keep wanting to come back because you want the story to be told again. You want to read it again. You want to hear it again. I don't know. I think that there's something of a habitus to that, right? To throw out some Latin and sound very pretentious. There's something about that, the habit of that returning. And like you say, good myths you want to return to. And like you said too, you want to imagine yourself, or you can't help but imagine yourself in different roles, doing different things. And Elliott, it's gonna pain you to hear this, but that is actually that's the Jesuit way of reading the Bible. So it's gonna pain you to hear that, but that's actually a Jesuit thing. I don't know if Tolkien's getting that. I don't think he's getting it directly from the Jesuits, but you know, it's this immersive reading is a thing that not just Jesuits. It is,
of course.
all sects of Christianity do it to a certain extent, but the Catholics are big about like Lectio Divina, right? Like divine reading of the Bible is very much about like place yourself in this place. Place yourself at the foot of the crucifixion. Place yourself at the manger, right? This is it's a contemplative way of reading the Bible.
Well, and that's the purpose for the Catholic churches laid out the way they are, right? Like that's why they do the crucifix, so that you can, not in an abstract way, but in a real way, be there at Christ's crucifixion with the host of saints who were there as well, right? And you know, I think that's very smart, and I think that's one thing that current American Protestantism really suffers from is overly abstracting Christ. Right.
Well, or overly abstracting God too, to this point where it's just you know, what is it, a therapeutic deism or whatever they call it? Like God loves you and wants you to be happy. That's the message. And it's like, oh, good Lord, literally, like, Lord have mercy, because that's really not what Christianity is about. And I mean, that's maybe Joel Osteen wants you to think that, but it's definitely not the Christianity that Tolkien has. And even though I am not Catholic, I mean, I have good Catholic friends, and I can really recognize, I mean, even as much as it might pain me as a Lutheran to say, you know, Catholics do certain things a lot better. And this sense of you are here, you are there, you are in, this is the body of Christ, right? In Catholic theology, it is literally the body of Christ. Like, it is very much, this is happening right in front of you. And I do think that Tolkien's Catholicism lets him do that very effectively in his myth making. So yeah.
And if I oh goodness, remind me again, was it Lewis who converted Tolkien, or the other way around?
Other way around.
Okay.
Well, okay. Lewis was always sort of drawn. He had this push pull with Christ. But Tolkien was a big part of him recognizing, having to kind of finally like drop his guard and be like, oh yeah, I guess I do believe. Well, that means I have to do a lot of things now because I do believe. Lewis never went all, from a Catholic perspective, Lewis never went all the way, but I mean, my understanding is as Lewis got older, right, before, quite sadly, there a little bit of falling out at the end, which is a shame. Lewis did get more and more high church Anglican. He was more drawn. I mean, he's a medievalist too, right? Like a Renaissance guy. Lewis is drawn to that time period as well. And being around fancy universities in England, like the Anglicanism there was always a little bit more Catholic anyhow. So maybe that's a more Protestant attitude toward. But what's the big difference? I don't know. It's something like is the Pope the number one guy or not? I mean, my understanding is at the end that like Lewis was very Catholic in many respects. I might be wrong. I'm not a Lewis expert by any means, but but it was Tolkien who kind of drew Lewis maybe in a way to Christianity, or maybe better said, in a way back to it, but in a different vein than Lewis was exposed to growing up as low church Protestant in Northern Ireland, where that's the whole thing that you kind of, you don't want to seem too Catholic if you're Protestant in Northern Ireland, whereas okay, in England it's different, right? There's not that same sectarian tension going on. So, but anyhow, which sad news about the Anglican Communion, or sad or good, who knows, right? But to this point, actually, I think it is a little bit of a Lord of the Ringsy point, honestly, which is that the Anglican Communion has just broken communion. That is to say, literally, the southern, the bishops of the global south, right, refused to take communion with the bishops of Canterbury and the Episcopalians in America, because they were like, guys, you guys are straying far too far away from Scripture. We just cannot, we can't abide that. And it's very interesting seeing the global south, right, the ones that the left likes to idealize, right? Making the decisions of righteousness. I mean, ridiculous. That's a whole thing. I'm not going to weigh in right yet on that. I mean, I need to do a lot more reading on that, but it is interesting regardless, that the sort of the people that the left likes to champion are maybe not what they think they are, right? They maybe have more traditional values left that hasn't been bleached out of them by modern liberalism, quite like it has in the West. So, you know, hey, based Africans. There you go. Right? Like
exactly.
They're more Anglican than the Anglicans.
Turns out weird.
Yeah.
Also more Catholic than the Catholics. I mean, all of the mega Chad based bishops in the Catholic Church come out of Africa, not South America because of Marcusa, but and all the commies down there, but and Southeast Asia. Right? The Southeast Asians are very hardcore because they survived the Chinese basically, right? And so they're like, what are we doing, guys? Like,
yeah. Well, no, but yeah, no, this has been great fun. Elliott, thank you for coming back on. I'm very much looking forward to other future Lord of the Rings episodes. I think I'm not going to promise it's going to be our next episode that's going to come out, because it might be nice to jump around a bit. But I think, Elliott, we had talked about the next Lord of the Rings thematic episode we're going to do, I believe, is going to be on Tom Bombadil, another figure that was not present in the books, who is awesome. So Tom Bombadilio, yes, we can dance with Goldberry next time and get Mr. Willow to stop misbehaving and hang out at the house of Tom Bombadil and have a merry old time.
If folks want to do a little bit of reading around, where I like to just naturally compare Bombadil, I would go read the Treebeard sections as well with the Ents, because I feel like there's a really good, at least there's a decent comparator to consider, right?
Yeah. There is a similarity. So much so that like I know that in the movies, right, they Bombadil doesn't appear, but in some ways the interactions between the Hobbits and Treebeard, yeah, you're right, have kind of take on a little bit, because even in the books there's a similarity between the two characters, and they take on a little bit of that, even more so in the movie. But yeah, no, Bombadil is great. Bombadil is based, and Bombadil doesn't even care for the ring in the truest sense of he doesn't care for it. And so we'll start to, I'm going to use a cringe professor term, but we'll start to unpack that next time.
Oh God.
Yeah, I know.
Because the people who use that term are invariably postmodernists, right? And they don't believe that things are packed to begin with. So I'm like, what the fuck are you unpacking? But anyway, that's just me being very like, anyway.
No, that is fine. We're all of us, some of us maybe more than others, traumatized by academia, for the better or for worse. So yeah.
But at least if you're analytical, you could unpack something, right?
It's just that term is very cringe. Yeah,
it's very cringe.
That term, Elliott, is problematic. Okay, every single fucking conference talk I've ever given, that's a problematic idea. What does that even mean? Anyhow,
I am solution addict. Fuck your problems.
Yeah, exactly. I hope people are doing well. Thank you again for being patient with us. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, comment, subscribe, all the things. More Tolkien. This is the year of Tolkien, and or at least a return to Tolkien. I'm excited. We'll be doing some of this stuff too. We got some 40K stuff planned, or at least we're planning some 40K stuff. More 40K, more Tolkien. Maybe some weird Nick Land here and there. Yeah. This is the year of doing cool stuff. And with that, I'll shut up finally. Actually, before I go, Elliott, do you have anything you want to tell the fine people about what you're doing, things you're doing, stuff's happening?
No, nothing super particular. Although somebody did ask me to comment on this Lord of the Spirits podcast, and it did very much trigger a bunch of the Christians in my life, which was a little bit amusing, and a little bit, of course, I'm a bit trolling in there too. But if you go to the Pawnbroker of Ideas, that's where you can see that. I don't know that it's the most amazing analysis or whatever, but basically, it's my opinion on what these Orthodox priests are speaking about when it comes to spirits and blah blah blah, all these things. This is the first episode though too, so I will withhold judgment from them. So.
Yeah, no, I will. I'll link to that in the description. I haven't done anything. I haven't written anything new yet. Again, it's been kind of crazy and busy, but I have some new stuff planned. I'm currently going to be. I'm writing a piece on Carpe Forum about the friend-enemy distinction, and the great show on HBO, Tokyo Vice. So it's going to be all about Yakuza and friend enemy. It should be cool. It'll be neon and there'll be samurai swords and you'll have a blast, hopefully, reading it. So I'll link that when it finally comes out. All right. And yeah, everyone take it easy. Have a great, it's a Friday, so have a great rest of your Lent to those of you who are doing Lent things, and have a good weekend to everyone. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Peace, everyone. See ya.